I used to think the biggest problem in my life was figuring out if I had enough ice for a second glass of iced tea. I was wrong. Dead wrong. The biggest problem, apparently, was my dog's humble, perfect 4-foot by 4-foot residence. It sounds dramatic, doesn't it? But trust me, my life went from zero to architectural warfare in about 48 hours, all thanks to a simple, decent doghouse. Before the madness, before the mahogany trim and the miniature gargoyles, life here in suburban Arizona was aggressively normal. It was the kind of neighborhood where the biggest scandal was whether the new asphalt sealant was too dark. I'm Jake, by the way. Mid-30s, works from home, owns a house, pays his taxes, and believes strongly in the power of a perfectly manicured lawn. The only true love of my life is Barnaby, a golden retriever mix who looks less like a noble companion and more like a perpetually surprised, slightly slobbery golden mop. Barnaby's original house, the one that started the whole debacle, was an honest-to-goodness dog house. I'd built it myself one spring afternoon. It was a simple, classic A-frame structure, built sturdy because, let's be honest, Barnaby is built like a wrecking ball when he gets excited. It wasn't fancy, didn't have a name plaque, and was painted a perfectly inoffensive shade of griga that blended seamlessly with the fence. It was not a structure. It was not an addition. It was just wood and shingles, and it provided shade and a quiet place for him to go full narcoleptic when the heat hit 90 degrees. He loved it. I loved it. It was the epitome of simple, suburban pet ownership. I was sitting back there on my deck, sipping my iced tea, plenty of ice, thank you very much, watching Barnaby snore loudly in his perfectly functional, legal, non-offensive Griga box when the air suddenly changed. You know that feeling? That ozone shift when the local neighborhood tyrant is about to descend? Yeah, I felt it. And then she appeared. Patricia, my next-door neighbor, and the reason why the CC&Rs for our subdivision are thicker than a phone book. She didn't come to my back door. Oh no, that would imply civility. Instead, she appeared at the property line, standing next to her prized rosebush, clutching a binder that looked suspiciously well-worn. She was wearing a beige linen suit and a look that could curdle milk from 50 feet away. "Well, Jake," she opened, her voice tight and clipped, like she was citing legal precedent. "I see we've made a choice to proceed without consulting the CC&Rs regarding accessory structures." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. My internal monologue, however, was running a marathon. Accessory structures? Lady, this is where my dog sleeps. Is the concept of a small wooden box truly so offensive to your minimalist sensibilities? I put on my most polite, bewildered face. "Hi, Patricia. Everything all right? I thought Barnaby's house was pretty low-key, honestly." She didn't acknowledge the greeting. She flipped open the binder. It was tabbed and highlighted. I swear, the woman ran her life like a legislative session. Section 4.b, subsection 3. It clearly states that any non-vehicular outbuilding exceeding 16 square feet must adhere to the maximum roof apex height as measured from the surrounding grade and maintain a setback of no less than 5 feet from the adjacent property line. "Patricia," I said, trying to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. "It's a doghouse. It holds a dog. It's not zoned for human habitation or—" "But that is precisely the issue, Jake. The roof apex, and I have pictures, taken with a measuring stick, I might add, is 49 inches. The maximum permitted height for a structure of this footprint, due to its proximity to the boundary, is 42 inches. That, Jake, is a 7-inch violation." She held up a blurry photo of the Grege A-frame, with a yardstick leaned precariously against it. The sheer dedication to her petty cause was breathtaking. "So," I summarized, slowly setting down my glass, "you're saying my dog's roof is 7 inches too tall for your liking?" "I am saying," she corrected, giving me a severe look, "that your structure is unpermitted and violates community standards. That 7 inches could potentially obstruct the view corridor from my third-floor window box. It must be removed or corrected within 72 hours, or I will proceed with reporting the violation to the city's Code Enforcement Office." I just stared at her. Barnaby woke up, let out a massive, rumbling sigh that was probably louder than Patricia's entire afternoon, and went back to sleep. The irony was suffocating. I ignored her. Of course I did. I figured she'd cool off, realize she was fighting a war against Grege shingles, and move on to reporting a rogue dandelion or something equally pressing. I was wrong. The next morning, the mail carrier arrived, looking like he was delivering a subpoena. It was a certified letter from the city's Code Enforcement Office. I didn't even have to open it to know who was behind it. The seal looked angry, and the paper felt dense with bureaucratic malice. I tore it open. It was worse than I thought. The letter was a masterpiece of legalistic nonsense. Notice of non-compliance regarding unauthorized accessory structure. Section 304.1.2. Roof pitch and setback violation. It cited the exact 7-inch difference Patricia had measured. It demanded a penalty fee of $200 and immediate removal or correction. She actually did it. She weaponized the local government against my dog's right to adequate overhead shelter. The sheer pettiness ignited something deep within me, something dark, something Victorian. Rage transitioned instantly into a cartoonishly ambitious, self-destructive plan. I stood over Barnaby, who was still blissfully napping in the now illegal house. "They want to talk about structures? Fine, we'll talk about structures. They want to talk about scale? Oh, buddy, we are going to war." I made a dramatic internal pledge. I wouldn't just comply. I wouldn't trim the roof. I would redefine the word doghouse. The code enforcement letter had called it an unauthorized structure. I decided that the new structure would be so authorized, so permitted, and so spectacularly ornamental that it would break their system. The word mansion was now my design brief. Barnaby deserved nothing less. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a furious sketching session, armed with a cocktail napkin and a permanent marker. Forget simple boxes. Forget Grege. I needed opulence. I needed architectural aggression. I landed on Victorian because it's the most over-the-top, least suburban style I could think of. The goal wasn't just to be big, but to be detailed. It needed a mini turret. It needed gingerbread trim so complex it would confuse a moth. It needed a tiny widow's walk, even though we live 500 miles from the nearest ocean. And yes, it needed stained glass, because if I was going to burn my savings on spite, Barnaby deserves some mood lighting when he judges me for being home all day. The plans took shape. 3/4 scale Queen Anne, 2 stories tall, with an interior ramp, obviously, a wraparound porch, and a foundation strong enough to withstand a small meteor strike. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was going to cost more than my last 2 cars combined. But the look on Patricia's face when she saw it? Priceless. My simple life was officially over. I was now an expert in 19th century residential architecture, purely for the sake of winning a feud with a woman who probably reported her own children to the PTA for improper snack labeling. The first few days were a blur of architectural history. I was neck-deep in Queen Anne, Gothic Revival, and stick Eastlake styles. I learned terms like asymmetrical massing, decorative shingle work, and fenestration, which is just a fancy word for windows, but I started using it constantly. I could confidently lecture you on the differences between dental molding and corbels. I realized the complexity was going to be financial suicide, but the principle was worth more than my retirement savings. A man must have a code, and mine is now, do not mess with Barnaby's resting habits. My initial design specifications were firm. 1. A mini turret, completely pointless, structurally complex, and aesthetically offensive to Patricia's beige soul. 2. Wraparound porch, for Barnaby to look disdainfully at Patricia's yard while pretending to be an elderly Southern gentleman. 3. Real, custom-stained glass, the centerpiece. It had to depict Barnaby as a slightly bored, benevolent monarch, surrounded by flying dog biscuits, lit up by the afternoon sun. 4. A proper foundation. If it was a structure, it needed a proper foundation. I wasn't settling for cinder blocks. I was going full concrete slab, spent hours on CAD software, meticulously scaling everything down. The spiral staircase for the second floor, the Widow's Walk, alone took 6 hours of planning. I was planning an entire miniature house. "This isn't a doghouse," my internal monologue screamed. "This is a statement. This is a middle finger rendered in historically accurate finger-jointed trim. This is the last great architectural battle of the 21st century, and the prize is the right to a 7-inch roof apex." I printed the blueprints. They were beautiful, detailed, and utterly insane. I titled the package, Barnaby's Folly, an accessory dwelling unit, K9. Armed with my beautiful, spite-driven blueprints, I descended upon the City Planning and Permits office. This was my first true test of bureaucratic endurance. I met Martha. Martha was everything a city planner should be: monotone, wearing sensible shoes, and completely incapable of processing anything outside of Form 37B. I slid my massive, rolled-up plans across her desk. "Yes, I need a permit for a 2-story, 3/4 scale Queen Anne structure. Exterior access only, zoned for one large golden beast." Martha didn't even look up at first. "And the nature of the structure, sir? Is this a shed? A storage unit? A pool house?" "It's a dog house." She sighed, a slow, deflating sound that indicated I was the 1,000th person that month to try to build an illegal shed. She finally unrolled the plans. She took one look at the elevation drawings, the detailed cross-section of the turret, and the note about the custom-milled gingerbread trim, and her eyes glazed over. "Sir," she said flatly, her finger tapping the note about the stained glass, "is this structure habitable? Does it require plumbing?" "It requires dignity, Martha. And no plumbing. Barnaby just goes where he wants, as is his right. But structurally, it needs to be approved for its load-bearing capacity and its proximity to the adjacent primary structure." She kept trying to file it under miscellaneous play structure. "Play structures do not require a mansard roof, sir." "But this is no ordinary play structure. It is an ornamental structure of canine significance." The back and forth was pure, distilled, bureaucratic comedy. She denied the permit initially because the plans were too detailed for a non-essential accessory. If a doghouse is a structure, Martha, I argued, using the legalistic language Patricia had forced me to learn, then this is merely a structure, and I demand the full structural review required by law for its height and footprint, which, I must point out, is 1 inch lower than the maximum permitted 8 feet. She eventually threw her hands up in defeat, or at least she moved them half an inch higher on the desk. We settled on a highly custom, non-habitable, ornamental structure permit. I had to submit elevation drawings, materials lists, and a ridiculous 7-page rationale detailing why Barnaby needed a widow's walk. Answer: to mourn the lack of treats. It took a week of furious, detailed work just to satisfy Martha, but I got the stamped permit. Authorization achieved. Phase 1 complete. Let the spite begin. Next came the contractors. I needed someone who could build something structurally sound, yet emotionally unhinged. This was harder than getting the permit. My first interview was with Generic Bob, owner of Bob's Quality Sheds and Garages. Bob arrived in a worn pickup truck, chewing tobacco, and looked exactly like a guy who installs vinyl siding. I laid out the blueprints on my kitchen table. Bob squinted at the tiny foundation diagram. All right, so you need a shed, maybe a garden unit? Looks like about a 6'6" footprint, easy day, Bob muttered, jotting a number on his clipboard. I can do vinyl siding, metal roof, maybe $4 grand, max. I pointed to the intricate drawing of the 3-foot turret. Bob, that's the turret. The whole thing is 4 feet tall. It needs true dentil molding and custom trim to match the existing Victorian architecture of the design. Bob's pen paused mid-air. He looked at the drawing, looked at me, and then back at the drawing. He slowly took the tobacco out of his mouth. Bob, look, buddy, for this price, I can put a 2-bedroom addition on your actual house. You want me to build a spiral staircase for a golden retriever? Are you good? Jake, I'm excellent, Bob. The quality of the interior molding is non-negotiable. He chews on cheap stuff. I need real complexity. This is about architectural integrity. Bob slowly gathered his papers. You're a weirdo, man. I'm out. He left quickly, calling Jake a weirdo under his breath as he walked off my porch. 1 down. My second interview was with the high-end artist, a pretentious man named Julian, who specialized in bespoke architectural experiences. Julian saw the vision, but not the budget. Julian arrived wearing an ascot and instantly started discussing the narrative of the structure. Julian. Ah, the defiant miniature, the glorious architectural satire. I adore it, Jake. We must use materials that speak to the oppression of the uniform HOA code. Imported Italian marble for the tiny foundation, perhaps? And the copper roofing? We should age it, give it patina. The stained glass must be French, naturally. This is a masterpiece, a critique of the modern subdivision. I braced myself. And the price for this critique? Julian. For the bespoke craftsmanship and the artistic vision? You're looking at 6 figures, easy. But it will be published, my friend. It will be the tiny, glorious subject of a feature in Architectural Digest miniature. Jake. 6 figures? Julian, it's 4 feet tall. Barnaby might track mud in it. I need functional spite, not an artistic statement that requires me to sell my car and a kidney. Julian looked profoundly disappointed that I lacked the commitment to high-end spite. He quickly retreated, shaking his head at my lack of financial vision. I was starting to despair. Was I destined to live in a world where my spite could not be realized in miniature Victorian glory? Then I found Sal. Sal was recommended by a guy who built props for Renaissance festivals. Sal was semi-retired and had built movie sets, theme park facades, and once a fully functioning miniature catapult. He understood pizzazz and spite equally well. Sal showed up wearing stained overalls and a knowing smirk. I presented the plans. He didn't laugh. He just squinted, pulled out a thick, mechanical pencil, and stroked his chin, humming slightly. Sal. A turret, a full mansard roof scaled down. For a dog? Son, I love it. Tell me about this gingerbread trim. You want actual corbels, or are we talking about a decorative facade? Actual corbels, Sal. I want Patricia to choke on the historical accuracy, I said, feeling a surge of hope. Sal tapped the plan. The stained glass, the Barnaby King window. I know a guy, ex-church artist. He's looking for a project that doesn't involve the Virgin Mary. He can make this a spiritual experience for the dog. And the neighbors. That's exactly what I need, Sal. I need her to feel the weight of my poor life choices rendered in historically accurate detail. Sal grinned, revealing a gold tooth. This isn't construction, Jake. It's performance art. We're going to make that lady across the street cry artisanal oat latte tears. My price is high, kid, because the emotional labor required to build something this profoundly stupid is immense. But I'll do it. His quote was still astronomical, well into the 5 figures. But it was within the range of stupid debt instead of life-altering ruin. We shook on the deal, a pact sealed in absurdity and pure, distilled enmity. The contract included a specific clause, final payment contingent upon observable neighbor distress. The construction phase was imminent. Barnaby was about to get a manor, and Patricia was about to get a nervous breakdown. The moment Sal and his crew arrived, the neighborhood harmony was shattered. The crew consisted of Sal, a silent, heavily bearded hipster carpenter named Finn, who only communicated via meaningful glances, and Sal's perpetually confused nephew, Gary, whose only job seemed to be fetching lukewarm sodas. They arrived with an enormous flatbed truck. The contrast between the sheer volume of material and the size of the thing we were building was hilarious. They unloaded lumber, bags of concrete mix, a mini scaffolding system, and an actual tiny crane that looked like it was stolen from a model train set. I narrated the ridiculous scene to myself. It looked like we were building a high-tech outhouse, or maybe just confusing the local wildlife. The foundation was poured by 2 guys who usually pour driveways, and they were treating this tiny 4-foot slab like they were building a nuclear silo. Then, exactly as predicted, the antagonist appeared. Patricia came out of her house like a beige-clad warrior, phone clutched in her hand, recording the entire setup. No words were exchanged at first, just the silent, palpable tension of mutual loathing and a deeply satisfying low-frequency hum of a cement mixer mixing far too much concrete for such a small structure. I looked directly at her phone camera. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just gave her the slow, measured nod of a man who knows he's making a terrible financial decision out of pure spite, but who is fully permitted to do so. She just stood there, holding that phone like a tiny, self-righteous scepter, I thought. I held her gaze until she finally retreated, her shoulder holster of judgmental rage momentarily empty. But I knew she was already on the phone, speed dialing everyone from the HOA president to the EPA. The construction phase was an exercise in miniature engineering and existential absurdity. The difficulties of scaling down complex architectural details were endless. Sal struggled for an entire morning building the 3-foot-tall spiral staircase that led to the widow's walk. "This is harder than the full-sized version," he grumbled, wiping sawdust from his brow. "My hands aren't designed for dollhouse trim." The materials were glorious. Real marble countertop for Barnaby's food bowls, because plastic just wouldn't do. The delivery of a miniature chandelier, battery-powered but still, was a highlight. Sal insisted we use a blowtorch to slightly age the copper for the roof, giving it a proper patina before it was even installed. Then came the centerpiece. The stained glass. The custom window arrived, packaged like an ancient artifact. The design was magnificent, a very bored Barnaby wearing a crown, surrounded by flying dog biscuits, with rays of glorious yellow light emanating from his head. Sal and I had a long philosophical debate about the correct shade of amber for the dog's halo. Sal: "It needs to be spiritual amber, Jake. Not tacky, 1970s bar amber. The light must reflect his nobility, not his penchant for chewing remote controls." Jake: "Exactly. And the white glass for the biscuits needs to be slightly opaque. I want them to look like little angelic snacks." Sal: "You and I, my friend, we understand the art of the absurd." The dental molding alone took Finn, the silent carpenter, 3 days of focused, meditative work with a 1/8 scale router bit. Sal: "The dental molding. It's beautiful work, Jake, but if this house survives a hurricane, I want credit for the sheer ridiculousness of the trim. Look at this symmetry. Look at the detail. It's a miracle of tiny woodworking." Jake: "Just make sure it's too heavy for Patricia to move, Sal. That's my only structural requirement." And Barnaby? Barnaby was the most profoundly indifferent participant in this entire spectacle. He just watched, occasionally stepping over an expensive piece of molding or trying to eat the blueprints. His lack of appreciation only fueled my spite. I was doing this for him, but also mostly for her. The police arrived on day 3. I knew Patricia had called 911 because her voice, though muffled by my wall, had a distinct, high-pitched "I demand to speak to your supervisor" quality to it. 2 uniformed police officers, Officer Davis and Officer Chen, pulled up. They looked weary, having clearly been sent on a neighbor feud call that was already spiraling into absurdity. They approached slowly, circling the half-finished Queen Anne dog mansion. Officer Davis, a tall, serious man, trying very hard not to smile. "Sir, we received a 911 call about hostile construction and unauthorized structure at this address." Jake, putting on my best, most reasonable, slightly manic voice. "Officer, I can assure you the only thing hostile is the architectural statement I'm making to my neighbor. This is Barnaby's new residence. It's fully permitted under ornamental structure, non-habitable." I waved the official city permit like a tiny flag of defiance. Officer Chen, a young woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, was looking up at the tiny, partially installed turret. That is a very ornate doghouse, sir. How tall is it?" Jake: 7 feet 9 inches, officer. Well within the 8-foot limit for accessory structures. I even went with the asymmetrical massing to improve wind shear resistance, which I might add is not a requirement, but merely a gesture of structural goodwill. Officer Davis was trying to read the tiny script on the permit. And the caller claimed the structure was threatening her. Jake: "Only aesthetically, officer. I believe she is feeling structurally outmatched. Do you see any criminal intent in this gingerbread trim? Any signs of malicious intent in this custom-milled balustrade?" Officer Chen leaned over and whispered to Davis, though I could hear her perfectly. "It's a tiny Victorian, Davis. I think it's kinda cute." Officer Davis, sighing heavily. Sir, you understand why she called. It's not exactly subtle. Jake, subtlety is the enemy of justice, officer. When one's rights to a properly sized roof apex are challenged, one must respond with overwhelming, permitted, architectural grandeur. I am simply exercising my right to construct an ornamental structure on my own property, according to the letter of the law. Davis ran a hand through his hair. He looked over toward Patricia's house, where a curtain was twitching violently. All right, look, no crime has been committed. No threats. The permit is valid. Ma'am, he raised his voice toward Patricia's window, please direct all future complaints regarding property aesthetics or structural interpretation to code enforcement, not 911. We are not the Code Enforcement Task Force for ornate dog homes. They exchanged an exasperated glance, told me to have a nice day, and left, shaking their heads at the absurd waste of police resources. Victory, brief and loud, was mine. The next day, Patricia had clearly taken the police's advice. Mr. Jenkins, a different, older, and even grumpier code enforcement officer, arrived. He looked like he ate paperwork for breakfast and washed it down with stale coffee. Mr. Jenkins stomped through my yard, clutching the original violation report. He didn't even say hello. He just pointed a trembling finger at the emerging mansion. Mr. Jenkins. This is deliberate provocation, Mr. Protagonist last name. The maximum height for an accessory structure is 8 feet. This is 7 feet, 9 inches, which is, Jake, fully compliant, Mr. Jenkins. Look at the craftsmanship. Look at the structural integrity. We even used double joists in the foundation. Barnaby is a heavy sleeper, and I take his comfort seriously. This structure is built to last, and it adheres to every single dimension specified in the municipal code for accessory ornamental structures. He tried to argue the spirit of the law was violated. I argued the letter was followed perfectly. Mr. Jenkins, the sheer scale, the cost, the audacity. Jake, sir, those are subjective observations, not code violations. The city permit lists the required materials and the elevation. I have exceeded the quality requirement, but not the size. Where is the violation? He circled the structure, desperate. He tried to cite me for noise, debris, or parking violations, but Sal and his crew were annoyingly professional, keeping the site spotless. Finally, he noticed the custom stained glass window being installed. It was currently reflecting a dazzling, multicolored, Barnaby-shaped glare onto Patricia's pristine white fence. Mr. Jenkins, ah, the glass. That is an unnecessary reflective surface. That could violate the light pollution ordinance. Jake, nonsense, Mr. Jenkins. That is canine-centric art that provides the aesthetic balance required by the ornamental permit. Furthermore, the angle of the reflection changes every hour. Unless you can prove my art is intentionally targeting her property, it's merely a happy coincidence of fenestration. He tried one last time, pointing at the miniature spiral staircase. The railing! It's not up to code for human handrails. Jake, it's up to code for dog handrails, sir. It provides safe access for a large golden beast. Unless you intend to climb it, the human factor is irrelevant. Mr. Jenkins finally collapsed under the weight of his own bureaucracy. He gave a profound sigh, rubbed his temples, and packed up his clipboard. Mr. Jenkins, I will have to check the zoning subcommittee's interpretation of ornamental spite, Mr. Last Name. But for now, you are compliant. This file is provisionally suspended. Do not, under any circumstances, add a working fountain or a tiny chimney. He left, defeated, and I knew I had won the bureaucratic war. Now, it was time for the social one. The final few days of construction were pure theatrical staging. Sal installed the tiny copper weather vane, the miniature wrought iron fence around the porch, and the working dimmable lights in the ceiling. The finished product was breathtakingly ridiculous. It wasn't just a doghouse. It was a perfect, tiny Queen Anne Victorian mansion, complete with working, miniature outdoor gas lamps, a magnificent copper roof, and the glorious stained glass window that bathed the interior in saintly golden light. It was, architecturally, flawless. A masterpiece of pointless, expensive, spiteful craftsmanship. My reaction was one of pure, unadulterated pride mixed with crippling debt anxiety. I'd spent a fortune, but the result was perfect. I called Barnaby over for his first official inspection. He lumbered up the 2 tiny steps to the wraparound porch. He sniffed the imported French molding, circled twice on the custom, 4-poster dog bed, and went inside. He stayed there for exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Internal monologue. He didn't care about the craftsmanship. He didn't care about the triumph over oppression. He just cared that it was quiet, dark, and slightly warmer than the grass. I spent $20,000 so my dog could nap. He walked out, stretched, and then immediately went and curled up on the scratchy outdoor welcome mat of my actual house. It was the most perfect, most Barnaby-esque rejection imaginable. But still, the mansion stood. And it was gorgeous. I couldn't just keep this victory private. It was too cinematic. I took a high-quality before picture of the original Griega house and a wide after shot of the Victorian masterpiece. I posted a sarcastic thread on a local social media page and on Reddit's pro-revenge sub. The title, "They said my doghouse was too big. I solved the problem." The post exploded. Within hours, I had 1,000 comments, 200 shares, and a DM from a producer at Channel 7 News asking for an interview. I decided to lean into the absurdity. I gave a great interview, full of dry sarcasm and philosophical defenses of my dog's new digs. The news crew arrived the next afternoon. The reporter, a very excitable woman named Denise, started her segment standing right next to the tiny turret. Denise. And here, folks, we see the very structure that sparked what has been called suburbia's most expensive feud. Jake, your original doghouse was deemed non-compliant. Why this magnificent response? Jake, looking serious, straight into the camera. Denise, I believe strongly in the rule of law. If a structure is a structure, it must meet all structural requirements. Barnaby is a golden beast of dignity. He deserves a residence that reflects his station, and one that is, crucially, 100% code compliant. This is not defiance, this is hyper-compliance. I subtly roasted Patricia without naming her, referring to certain aesthetically sensitive neighbors and the tyranny of the trivial. The camera panned over the Victorian details, lingering on the stained glass Barnaby King window. The Sun's segment aired at 11 p.m. My phone blew up. The mansion was officially a local landmark. Cars started slowing down to take pictures. The attention, I knew, was driving Patricia completely, gloriously mad. To add insult to injury, and to fully cement my status as the neighborhood's eccentric champion, I hosted a ridiculous grand opening ceremony. I invited my few normal neighbors, who were now my biggest fans, and the Channel 7 news crew came back. I had Sal and Finn hold a tiny red ribbon across the porch steps. I stood there, holding a tiny pair of scissors, giving a toast. Jake, friends, neighbors, and viewers at home, we are gathered here today to witness the dedication of Barnaby's Folly, a monument to the triumph of individuality and the constitutional right of all canines to Gothic architecture. When our rights are challenged by bureaucracy, we must not shrink. We must escalate. We must build a tiny turret. I now dedicate this accessory dwelling unit to the noble Barnaby, whose simple existence was deemed a structural hazard. I cut the ribbon. Barnaby, looking incredibly bored and possibly slightly annoyed by the fanfare, was gently nudged by Sal to walk through the door. He sniffed, turned around, and went back to the patio. The crowd laughed. The dialogue with my normal neighbors was fantastic. Neighbor Tom. Jake, man, this is the most beautiful waste of money I have ever seen. Good on you for sticking it to Patricia. She complained about my wind chimes last year. Neighbor Sarah. The stained glass is making my soul heal. Seriously, I drive past every morning just to see the sun hit it. It's like a tiny cathedral of spite. The consensus was clear. Patricia was the worst. My absurd mansion was the best. The cheers and laughter were the final straw. Patricia had been watching the entire spectacle from behind her lace curtains. But the sound of the small crowd, the presence of a second news crew, and my loud public declarations about her tyranny finally pushed her over the edge. She stormed out of her house, wearing the same beige linen suit, but this time it was slightly wrinkled. Her face was an alarming shade of puce. This wasn't a tactical maneuver. This was an unhinged final attack. Patricia. This is an eyesore. This violates the spirit of the entire community. You did this just to spite me, she shrieked, her voice cracking, completely forgetting that the Channel 7 camera crew was pointed directly at her. The crowd went silent. Denise, the reporter, looked like she'd just won the lottery. I walked toward Patricia, stopping halfway between her rosebush and Barnaby's turret. I kept my voice calm, almost meditative, ensuring every single word was audible and reportable. Jake. Patricia, this is the height of structural compliance and a monument to my dog's inherent dignity. I'm simply adhering to the law. You reported a doghouse. I built a house for a dog. I simply prefer the Victorian style. Do you have a problem with 19th century architecture? Patricia. You are harassing me. You are flaunting this miniature monstrosity in my face. It's too expensive. It's too big. It's ugly. Jake. It is exactly 7 feet, 9 inches tall, Patricia. I have the permit. If you have a problem with the city's definition of an ornamental structure, I suggest you take it up with them. As for the expense, my finances are not under the purview of your moral code. It's a very sound investment in spite equity. She screamed a final generic threat. You'll regret this. This isn't over. Realizing she had lost the crowd, the legal battle, and now, spectacularly, the public relations war. The camera kept rolling as she spun around and retreated back into her house, slamming the door so hard a small terracotta pot wobbled on her porch. The sound of that slamming door was the most beautiful, anticlimactic victory bell I had ever heard. The media frenzy died down a few days later, but the structure remained. My neighborhood peace, however, was never quite the same. It was better. About a week after the grand opening, I received a final official visit from code enforcement. This time it wasn't Martha or Mr. Jenkins. It was Tess, a code enforcement supervisor, who had clearly drawn the short straw. She looked exhausted, like she'd spent the last week explaining to the city council why a doghouse was trending on Twitter. She didn't even bring a clipboard. She just held a single folder. Tess, speaking softly, as if not to wake the sleeping beast of bureaucracy. Mr. Last Name, I am here to close this file permanently. Your structure is technically compliant, which, against all odds and common sense, is correct. You have followed the letter of the law to an agonizing degree. Jake. Thank you, Tess. I aimed for regulatory perfection. Tess. However, the city has decided to avoid a repeat performance. Effective immediately, we are adding a highly specific, temporary provision to your property file. We are calling it the Barnaby's Folly Clause. It states that no other structure of comparable ornamental absurdity, meaning any structure whose price-to-size ratio exceeds a preset metric, can be built within the next 20 years without a full, city-wide referendum. Jake. I accept my fate, Tess. This means I can't add a miniature Gothic fountain next year, I assume. Tess. Her eyes narrow. If you want to spend the next 3 months in court arguing the definition of water feature, be my guest. But I suggest you don't. The file is closed. We are done. Never contact us again. She put the folder back under her arm and walked briskly to her unmarked sedan, the fastest code enforcement officer I had ever seen. The war was officially, legally, and finally over. I later calculated the final cost, including Sal's labor, the custom glass, the marble bowls, and the miniature chandelier. It was an astronomical price tag. But honestly, it was cheaper than therapy, and definitely much, much funnier. Jake's new status in the neighborhood was cemented. I was the local legend, the guy who won the feud using pure, spectacular, expensive spite. Children stop by regularly with their parents just to stare. They leave Barnaby treats on his tiny wraparound porch, treating the mansion like a tiny canine shrine. Barnaby, naturally, accepts their offerings with a yawn. Patricia's fate was the most satisfying part. She now avoids my yard entirely. She drives a longer way around the block just to bypass the site of the turret. She's been defeated, not by a fistfight or shouting, but by gingerbread trim and custom-stained glass. She is the shadow of her former self, and her lawn looks slightly less perfect, perhaps in mourning. And Barnaby's life? Well, he occasionally uses the mansion, usually for about 10 minutes at sunset, when the stained glass projects that glorious spiritual amber light onto his fur. When he does, he looks impossibly regal, a monarch briefly visiting his summer palace before returning to the true seat of power, the leather couch inside my actual house. So, what did I learn from all of this? That spite is an excellent motivator, and that the best revenge is always the most over-the-top, meticulously planned, and fully permitted kind. I could have just trimmed the roof 7 inches and been done with it. But where's the fun in that? Where's the story in that? The moral of the story, folks, is this. Sometimes, the only way to beat unreasonable bureaucracy and neighborhood tyranny is not to fight the rules, but to comply with them so extravagantly that the system collapses under the weight of its own ridiculousness. If you're going to get reported by a Karen, you might as well give her something truly magnificent worth reporting. Barnaby is happy. I'm financially ruined, but spiritually enriched. My property value is likely in the gutter, but my story is gold. And that, my friends, is the story of how my dog became the only resident in this zip code with a 3-foot-tall turret, and the only homeowner to successfully weaponize Victorian architecture against a linen-clad tyrant.